An interesting and informative panel. We're now ready for the keynote address, The Oil and Gas Industry in India, Past and Future Trends. And I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Mike Watts, Deputy Chief Executive, Cairn Energy PLC.
Good morning, everyone. You'll detect from my accent that I'm from one of those struggling European economies that Bill just spoke about. And it was interesting, I arrived last night from London, which meant I was awake at 2 o'clock this morning, and I put on the BBC radio, and the first thing I heard was that India had a spacecraft just arrived at Mars and is orbiting Mars, which is quite remarkable because it's just a few days after the US spacecraft arriving in Mars. And I think that's just a reminder of how technologically advanced India is as a nation. This is just a brief talk and a high level. I know none of you or few of you will be specialists in the energy sector, but energy is something which I've spent all my career working on, and a large part of it has been in this part of the world, South Asia and India in particular. And there's no doubt that energy is the basis for economic growth. The forecast that we heard a moment ago in the insightful comments about the growth potential in India will depend to a large extent about the strength of the Indian energy sector. And declining domestic resources mean expanding imports at a time of historical high energy prices. So the Indian balance of payments is damaged by not stimulating domestic investment. I'm just going to give you an overview of a sort of personal perspective of the past, a whistle through the Indian energy sector, and then really try and say the opportunity is there, like it is for many countries, to try and replicate the success story of the last dozen years or so in the US. The US has transformed its own domestic energy sector by the so-called focus and discovery of unconventional technology, what you probably know as shale gas, shale oil, etc. The rest of the world has yet to catch up, and it remains to be seen in competition for capital, competition for expertise, which countries are best suited to try and follow in the US footsteps. I apologize for the slides. I had them on a PowerPoint, but my iPad was too small to email them, so it's just a PDF. I think the first thing to say, and it comes back to often in business world perception and reality. I did a study in about 1990 and was trying to figure out why there wasn't much attention on the Indian energy sector by Western companies. And a quick comparison between Southeast Asia and South Asia threw up the interesting fact that in the 110 years previous to 1990, the Western majors, so if you think of Exxon and Chevron and Amoco, Shell, BP, those sorts of companies had collectively drilled more than 8,000 exploration wells in Southeast Asia. Yet that same group of companies had only drilled 12 wells in India, which was geographically a similar size. And I think that has left a perception that India was not prospective for either oil or gas. And yet the fundamentals are there. Natural seeps of gas often are the sites of ancient temples where you have eternal flames. You have seeps of oil. all the way down the Irrawaddy in the 14th century in Burma. People were making bricks out of oil dug out of the riverbanks and burning them in the kitchens. So fundamentally, there are signs of oil and gas in the Indian subcontinent. There are a lot of successful Indian companies, some state companies and private companies that have made discoveries, and one or two Western companies. But let's just have a quick look at the exploration history of the country, and I summarize from about 1880. And I should say the one thing, the energy sector is well known to everybody in India, because India has the world's longest continuously producing oil field. It's an oil field called Digboy, which was actually discovered by a young chap on the back of an elephant. When the elephant dug, then the oil was not far below the surface. And that field has been developed and is still producing today. But between about 1880 and independence in 1948, the energy sector was dominated by Burma oil. Post-independence, Burma oil was nationalized, and some of the large Indian state entities like ONGC were created. ONGC made the first discovery of oil outside of the Assam area, and that was in the state of Gujarat, in the geological area called the Cambay Basin. In the 1970s, offshore Gujarat, ONGC made the giant oil discovery called the Bombay High. And those two events have created the energy heartlands, which have produced the industrial heartland of the Gujarat economy. Round about 1992 to 95, there was an opening for Western companies to get involved. So the Indian government had what you call a small fields round. They were offering Western companies the opportunity to bid and come and develop some of the discoveries that ONGC had made. There was a company called Enron that came in, a Canadian company called NICO, and Cairn through two other British and Australian companies who Cairn acquired. Those companies, when they came in, all made great successes of the small fields, and it was only within 2 or 3 years that each of those small fields was discovered to actually be large, medium fields. And the Indian government decided not to offer any fields to the industry again. So in the last 120 years, there's only been a 3-year window to get in at a production level. And we were fortunate as a company to be one of those 3. We all know that Enron had tremendous problems with their Dabol project, and eventually they sold their producing fields to BG. Since 1999, the Indian government has offered exploration rounds. So those are not producing properties or development projects. They are risk capital exploration projects, inviting companies to come in. And we have spent many fond occasions in Houston or Calgary or other parts of the world in the company of the Indian government, representing the business case for India. And I'm pleased to do that again. To bring you right up to date, I think within the last 12 months, it's interesting. It's not got anywhere yet, but there has been an alliance with ConocoPhillips and ONGC, and that is to look at the potential of the unconventionals in India. Oh, I've lost my slide. Is there any way to get the slide back? That would help because they're very small. Is it going to take long or? Okay. Well, this a little bit of a pun here, a conventional career. This just shows you the projects that I've personally been involved with, either pre-Cairn or with Cairn or with some other companies. I happened to be the last employee of Burma Oil when it imploded in the mid-1980s, which I thought was quite ironic. It was celebrating its centennial, and I left the building with the documents describing the 100 years history of the company. And I felt it upon myself to try and, in my career, to try and regenerate the areas of focus of Burma Oil. So I went into Pakistan, I went into Myanmar or Burma when the curfew was on in the 80s, Thailand, Bangladesh, and then in the early 90s into India. The company that's been most successful is Cairn. We have now a 20-year history in India, and currently we are producing more than 30% of India's domestic oil production, which is the status that you would expect to have from a major rather than a small British independent company. And really the reason for that is we had running room. We had Enron, who, as competition, who were locked into legal battles. We had NICO, a small Canadian company, who were focused on developing one field. So we were really the only foreign company able to grow for 10 years or so. And whether it was onshore, offshore, shallow water, deep water, we were able to make discoveries and actually shatter some of the myths that India lacks the prospectivity. One of our projects, the largest project, is in the state of Rajasthan, which is thinly populated. It only has 60 million people, but it is home to the world's largest populated desert, and we have found the largest oil field onshore India in the last 10 years, and we're developing. That project on its own in the last 4 years has presented $12 billion of revenue to the Indian government through the revenue sharing mechanism. Over the life of the project, it will give the Indian government $100 billion. So without question, it's one of the great successes and gives an example of what can be achieved. Our flagship project offshore, that's the PowerPoint, thank you. Our flagship project offshore was a field on the eastern side, north of Madras or Chennai, in Andhra Pradesh, where we developed the Rava field. This was our original entry point, thought to be a small field with about 70, 80 million barrels. We have today produced well over 230 million barrels. We put in place 8 platforms, pipelines, infrastructure. We helped liberalize the subsidized gas market in Andhra Pradesh, and we built that processing plant, and we sell the crude locally at Brent world prices. So a 20-year Indian success story, and it shows you what can be achieved when you are aligned with the government and the state in your objectives. To briefly show you the flagship project onshore, Rajasthan, when we got there, there were no indications of hydrocarbons. There was no power supply. There was no water. We found oil. To maximize your oil production, you need water for secondary recovery. So we explored for water in the desert. Fortunately, we found vast quantities of subterranean fossil water left over from the last ice age, far more than we would ever need, and so we've been able to benefit giving all the water data to the local authorities now for them to benefit the local population. We discovered gas, and with the gas we built a power station and so that we could have it gas-fired to generate all the electricity we needed for the oil development. We were in a fairly remote location. not that far from the Pakistan border. We used to arrive at the Indian Air Force Base, fly in and land, drill our wells, and to sell the crude, we had to build a pipeline, which is still the world's longest heated pipeline, of around about 700 kilometers to the coast. The interesting thing, if you look at the middle map, the coast, that shows you Gujarat, you should know that 2 of the world's largest 3 oil refineries are on that map, operated by company Reliance and one operated by Essar. So India as a nation is a huge importer of crude oil, but it actually processes that crude and exports refined products. So another example of the industrial heartland of India. So as a company, we more than set out and achieved what we wanted to. We built a business which is meaningful material. Come 2006, we realized to start the $3 or $4 billion development that we needed to get our crude from Rajasthan to the refinery locations on the coast, we would need to raise capital. It was just at the point that the European banks were starting to close because of the impending capital crisis. Our solution was to float our subsidiary on the Bombay Stock Exchange. So we took a subsidiary, put it on the Bombay Stock Exchange, and put in a top tier, corporate tier of an Indian board, and we sold 31% to institutions. Raising that capital, we reinvested in India into our development project. Over the years, we sold more to raise capital as we invested further. In 2011, it was a watershed for us because we sold below 50%, and so there was a change of control. So today, our legacy is a company called Cairn India, and we, the former parent, has watched its daughter grow, and we now only own 10% of that company. So I think it was, to my mind, I'm very proud, it's the perfect way to come into a country, create wealth, leave behind a legacy, tangible assets run by local people. So that's the past. The exciting thing is what is happening today. And there won't be any American in this room who doesn't understand what's happening in the States, but perhaps somebody from Delhi may not realize, but there's been a tremendous energy revolution centered, particularly in the US, but North America in the last 14 years. There's a great book by a New York journalist, Zuckerman. If you pick it up at the airport, The Frackers, and read it, it will give you the entire 15-year history in a long-haul flight read. It's a great story. It's one of the success stories. It started off in 2000 with shale gas, but it's moved on since about 2009 into shale oil. And now the techniques involved with unconventionals are now being applied in some areas to more conventional properties and having a relook and see if enhanced recovery can happen. The exciting thing for somebody who's not American is where is this technology going to go internationally? But just a quick pointer, if you look at the graph on the left, that's gas, and what the US has done is dramatically increased its gas production in the last few years to such an extent that the price of gas has fallen dramatically. On the right, it shows you the oil increase in production in the US, which has been phenomenal in the last 4 years, again at a time of historic prices. So there's no doubt that the US is the global pioneer, and every other country needs to watch, listen, and learn. Now, I don't believe there's been a country since the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century which has had such a competitive advantage on other countries that the US and Canada enjoy at the moment. They can both look forward to long-term domestic energy supply. Everybody else is down at the bottom left of this graph, struggling to work out where to go, where to drill, to try and find the expertise to get the drilling rigs. The US has so many advantages. Technical, commercial, and political risks are the main risks we look at as a business. Locals may not think it, but political risk is virtually zero for an investor. Commercially, the risk is very attractive because of the fiscal terms in the US, and the last 15 years has shown that the technical risk is very low and can be overcome by applying new technology. So the US is currently attracting about 40% of the global investment in the exploration and production business, which means the rest of the world is competing for the 60% of the capital that doesn't come to the US. Every other country is in competition to get access to that capital. The ones at the moment, Argentina and China look likely to be the most the quickest on the uptake. China's drilled about 300 shale wells, and even last month they had a record one producing 19 million cubic feet a day, which is equivalent to some of the best wells in the US. But the US is home to 2/3 of the world's drilling rigs. The US is drilling more wells on shale oil than the rest in 1 year than the rest of the world is drilling on conventional and unconventional. So there is a tremendous lag between the rest of the world and the US. Now, where does India suit? This is a map from the EIA, which is a part of the US Department of Energy. It shows where they think the shale gas potential worldwide is. This map will not be accurate. It's the best there is, but these things are never determined accurately. They're always a guess. Some areas will have more data than other areas. But you can see there that India has the number 63. Now, 63 may not mean anything to you. It's 63 TCF. That's about twice the potential of the UK North Sea. But in comparison to the US, Mexico, Canada, or China, or Argentina, it's very small. This may be perception, it may be reality, we do not know. But any international oil company looking at that map is not naturally going to choose India as the first place to come to explore for shale gas, unless all the other conditions for investment are correct. The fiscal terms, the political environment, etc. So in this competitive world, India needs to attract the capital to exploit this potential. 2 weeks ago in Mumbai, I was at what was the second annual Shale Oil and Gas Conference. There was only one US company present, and that was a US service company. Apart from us, there was one other foreign company present. In 2 weeks' time, in Beijing, is the third Chinese Shale Oil and Gas Conference. So the world is starting to notice. What you will notice is most of the US players, the Halliburtons on the service side, etc., and some of the big companies are presenting at the Beijing conference. That's because they see there's more potential. And, you know, I think India has got to be aware it's in competition. If you think about Europe, which is my home, you can list all the advantages that the US has, and when you compare Europe with India, India has some advantages over Europe. I would bet that if India can overtake any of the European countries in this revolution, if that bottom one, the fiscal terms, are made attractive enough. To attract investment, you've got to get returns. Sure. I'm just really coming to the conclusions. This is the industrial heartland of India. This is Gujarat, the Cambay Basin. All the coloured blobs are the oil and gas fields. This is, you fly over it at night, it's lit up. This is where all the factories are, the power stations, the pipelines. This is where there are wells, a database which is kind of comparable to some of the databases in Texas. This is the starting place that you need to come to India to look for shale oil and shale gas. The US has some favorable geological characteristics. At the moment, we don't know in India. We're at the proof of concept stage. We need to overcome them. And that, I think, is part of the reason why ConocoPhillips have come in with ONGC. So in conclusion, I would say that India, because of its population, has an insatiable thirst for energy. At these historic high prices, it's damaging its balance of payments. It needs to stimulate investment in domestic supply. We played a full role in the conventional story of India, and I think it's up to India now to attract the investment into the unconventional sector to see if India can replicate the success that the US has had and learn from the American expertise. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? If you have a question, raise your hand. We'll bring a mic around.
Compared to China, in the future, is there more hope for freedom of investment in India with less bureaucracy? And will there be more action and less holding back because the culture and the taxes and bureaucracy?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I've never operated in China, but I have in nearby countries like Vietnam, etc. You can do business in India. We have demonstrated that. In several states, we have been successful. I think it can be done again. The last 5 years have been detrimental to attracting investment into India. The inertia from the coalition government, if you like, and issues such as retrospective taxation have damaged business confidence. But that's not something which is irreparable. I think now, as Chair Lady, I think, was it Diane, said at the very beginning, this is a pivotal moment for India. The change in the political scene, the political mandate this current government has, is for strength, it's for leadership, it's for direction. And the business community, no matter where you are in the world, you want stability. You want confidence to invest. And I'm a firm believer in the Indian model. And anybody who goes there knows it's a fantastic place to be. I just know sometimes, they need to focus on getting some of the confidence building measures right and tax fiscal terms, particularly when you're not perceived to have the best technical position.
Do you see a solution for the retroactive tax issue that Cairn has found itself in? And is your sort of argument about attracting capital resonating with the new government as it relates to the retroactive tax issue?
Yeah, I'm very hopeful. I think we pride ourselves in having been a force for good in India, and we've certainly complied with every law, every rule. We've paid all our taxes overdue. I think what we were victim of was at the very tail end of the last administration. There were missives thrown out. We've not had a tax demand at all, and we're obviously trying to, through dialogue, really, not through legal matters, but through dialogue to come to a conclusion. We just know in our heart of hearts that, a quick fix in India is a year. A quick fix somewhere else may be a lot shorter, but you have to bring your expectations down. And, I'm sure, because there are some very favourable comments have been made by various ministers about the whole investment climate. The government's only just been in power a few months. They've just had their first budget. You have a new budget in February, you know, and I think it's a continuing dialogue. So I'm hopeful there will be a resolution. Yes.
In the past, can you hear me? Yeah. In the past, historically, the foreign companies have gone and acquired Indian companies or established joint ventures. In your case, an Indian company came in and acquired you. What was the incentive for you to be acquired by an Indian company? And how have you handled the inner workings which were filled with corruption and bureaucracy in the past? How did you handle that working with the Indian company?
Yeah. I think the first point, when we IPO'd, and the reason for us to IPO was to raise the capital to re-inject, basically because the banks were shy at the time. So when we went from 100% to 70% ownership, we were pointing the way that this was a gradual exit as the project materialized. We had a surprise approach after we had built the pipeline. So it was almost, we had discovered all this oil, we had built the processing plant. As soon as we had built the 700-kilometer pipeline and sent the first molecules down to the refinery, the system was proven to be working. We had a knock on the door. And it was an opportunity to give cash back to our shareholders. So we sold to an Indian entity, a mining entity, and we returned the cash to our shareholders. You know, and that's what we're in business for, is to create wealth, but also realize for the benefit of our shareholders. On the corruption front, we, as a company, have never faced what I would say hearsay issues. We aligned ourselves through joint venture partners. We Indianized our business as quick as we could. So, for example, our field in Andhra Pradesh was operated entirely by an Indian workforce. And I know things are perception is somewhere else. But as a business, we have never encountered the sorts of difficulties. And I think you just keep telling the same story over and over again. This is what we do. We have the UK governance regulations, just as a US company would have US government regulations. So, you know, we're very proud of what we've done and what we've achieved. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Butts. We're now at break time. We'll reconvene at 10 minutes to 11.